So today we are going to talk about guidelines and rules. What is the difference? And how they apply to publishing and contests. So first we're going to talk about guidelines versus rules. Rules are ones that you have to follow. In publishing and contests, if they say these are the rules, then you absolutely want to follow them. If you don't, you will have your story chucked in the garbage. It doesn't matter how good you read one word of it. If they say, please put it in blue font, you better, gosh darn, put it in blue font, even if you think it's stupid, because they will throw it out if it's not. Rules are honestly there for publishing companies and contests to have an excuse to not have to read everything. They don't want to have to read every single little entry if they don't have to. So if they can give a reason why not to, they'll just chuck it in the garbage. It's kind of similar to the ACT and colleges and the SAT in colleges, where if you don't get a certain score, you don't get into certain colleges. It's just an excuse for them to get rid of more applicants so they're not completely swamped. Now, one thing I want to mention is with my contest, the rules will disqualify you from the raffle and will disqualify you from winning first, second, third, or an honorable mention. You will only get a participation prize, but you will still get your feedback back. Just keep in mind that those rules are there for a reason. That is why I disqualify you aside from a participation prize if you don't follow the rules. Because, hey, I don't want to throw your story out completely because I don't believe that's fair, even though other contests and publishers will absolutely do that. But at the same time, I also know that it's important to follow the rules, and there are consequences for not following those rules. As far as guidelines goes, guidelines typically are things you want to follow anyway. They are generally not a requirement unless you're looking into publishing. If it says publishing guidelines, that interprets as rules. If it says publishing, if it says guidelines and it's a contest, that generally means that you should do this anyway because it will give you kind of mental or maybe even physical bonus points. Um, but it's not required. The only time guidelines are required is if it's for publication. If they say the guidelines for publication are that it has to be in Times New Roman 12-point font, you have to do it in that. Doesn't matter that it says guidelines, they will chuck it. Um, there are some places, obviously, that say, like, it's fine, we just prefer this, but that is not the normal, I will say. As for guidelines with my contest, the guidelines will actually give you more points. I have a formatting section on my contests, and we will give you points for doing it in the guideline rules, and we will minus points in that section for not following the guidelines because it is good to practice following the guidelines, just in general. All right, so next thing I want to talk about is formatting. Now, the reason I want to talk about formatting is because of the fact that oftentimes guidelines and rules have to do with formatting. That's the whole point of them. Most of the time, you won't find guidelines that are like, it has to have a female character or whatever. Very rarely. Most of the time, it has to do with formatting. And the reason why is because it becomes very, very difficult to read all the entries if you have like cursive font that you can't read and big huge font, and so as a result it takes up 20 pages when it should only take up 3. It just makes it very difficult. It also makes it so that as a reader it's easier to adjust to the same font in the same function every single time. Whereas if it's a different font every single time, my eyeballs start to hurt as a grader. So I would highly recommend following basic formatting guidelines and rules, even if they don't tell you you have to. The reason why is because, as I mentioned before, if it's for a contest, it will kind of give you bonus points in their eyes where they'll say, oh, hey, they formatted it like a traditionally published document, even though we didn't tell them to do that. That makes them impressed. That makes them see you as more mature than you actually are, especially as teenagers. That is going to give you a serious leg up. Whereas other teenagers, I've seen contest entries for my contest and for other publications that I've been a part of helping publish and things like that, that have been in all sorts of crazy fonts. And even if we didn't have a font rule, I will say I was more impressed with the people who did it in traditional publishing format because I knew that they were trying to be professional. That being said, what does professional look like? Professional looks like Times New Roman 12-point font. Every once in a while you can do Arial 12-point font, but I would say 99.9% of the time they want Times New Roman. Arial is the previous standard, but it is kind of disappeared into time, and not a lot of people like that anymore. Courier is also another font that you could use, but again, is outdated. So if anything, you might actually throw them off because you'll be like, here's Courier font formatted stuff. And they'll be like, oh, are you like 45? And you'll be like, no, I'm it's going to throw them off because Courier was used years ago. I'm about I use the example being 45. Um, but it is no longer considered the standard. The standard is Times New Roman 12-point font. Now, the next thing you want to remember is double space it. Unless they say otherwise in their guidelines and rules, you want to double space it because it makes it so much easier on your readers' eyeballs. That way they can read it and not feel like the words are all scrunching together and they're blurring together. Will it be in single space or close to single space, depending on how it is formatted, in an actual novel? Yes. When you are trying to traditionally publish and to enter contests, that is not your job. Your job is not to put it in the final publishing format. That is the publisher's job. That is their job. Don't take away their job. They like doing their job. Let them format it. You format it this way, they will change it to what it has to be when you get published. Next thing you want to keep in mind is one exception to the rule, and that is the fact that you want to put it in 14-point font if your story is for early middle grade readers. When I say early middle grade readers, think just barely exiting the learning to read section and entering the chapter book section. Like minimum of, I would say, 8 and maximum of, I would say, maybe 9 to 10. If you are doing it for like 11 to 13-year-olds, you definitely want to still do Times New Roman 12-point font. So that's the funny thing about middle grade, is a lot of people get confused and think all middle grade is 14-point font. That is not true. It is only early middle grade. As far as formatting in general, just make sure that you follow the basic formatting you typically see in a book when it comes to other things. Now, when I say in a book, obviously it's not in Times New Roman 12-point font double spaced in a book. That is the exception. However, you want to follow basic other formatting rules. For example, have a tab at the beginning of every single paragraph. And when I say tab, I mean actually use the tab button. Don't just press the space bar 5 million times. Then you'll have uneven spacing and the publisher's going to be like, what's going on? And then they're going to figure out you did space a million times and they're going to go, oh no. And they'll have a little bit of a panic attack. Next thing you want to do is you want to, for the time breaks or time jumps, you want to make sure that you have a big space from one. You want to use 3 of the hashtag symbol all bunched up together because that is the most professional way to do it for a symbol break. Now, in a book, you'll see this with a fancy symbol, right? Like if it's a book about royalty, it might have 3 little crowns and then move on to the next paragraph or whatever. But that is because of the fact that that is what the publisher did. They put it in as 3 hashtags. The publisher made it 3 crowns. Again, this is their job to do the fancy thing. Don't do 3 fancy crowns because that's unfortunately going to get tossed. Even if it's cool, they're going to think it's unprofessional, so they'll toss it. Um, Next thing is making sure with your dialogue formatting that you space it out. Every dialogue line, hit enter, hit tab, start again. Hit enter, hit tab, start again. The only time you don't want to do this is if you're interrupting your own dialogue with an action. So for example, I can't believe that happened today. She fidgeted with her fingers and touched her face. I really just can't believe that happened. You're continuing the same person's dialogue. If it was a different person's dialogue, then you'd do a new paragraph. All right, moving on. And don't forget paragraphs in general. Paragraphs help people not to be able to lose their mind. It makes it much easier to read. All right, so next thing that I wanted to talk about was um, with formatting in general and with contest rules and guidelines. Um, you want to follow it no matter what. So, font. If they have some sort of specific font that they want, do it in that specific font. There was one time where I almost didn't, I did anyway, but I almost didn't even submit to a contest because I was like, ew, that's a gross font. I hate that. I don't want to submit my contest entry in that font. But ultimately, do what you need to do to get your stuff published. Even if you want it in some sort of fun font, again, that's not your job. You can mention that in your query letter and be like, "Hey, this is for a children's book, and I'd really love it if it was in this like really cool fancy font for the children's book." You can absolutely say something like that, but that's not your job. Your job is to follow the rules. And then the publisher will go back and look at your query letter and say, oh, she requested that we put it in a fun font, and we've agreed to publish her. So we'll go back and talk to her, and they'll be like, hey, what font did you want it in? And then you can talk about font. um, Trying to make yourself stand out by not following the guidelines and rules is ultimately just going to make you look bad. It's kind of sad because we want to encourage creativity, but at the same time, we want to make sure that people are following the rules. Now, funny story with this. Um, this is not always the case, but oh my gosh, I'm losing marker. Most of the time, I've noticed that people who follow the rules and guidelines for any time that I've had entries for the magazine I work for, anytime that I've had entries for my contests, any times that I've had entries for other contests or publications I've been a part of, if they follow the rules and guidelines, their entries tend to be more quality. Now, is that 100% of the case? No, there have been some times where they've followed the rules to a T perfectly and their story is still just kind of okay. Um, but I will say that part of the reason they do this is not just to get rid of people and not just to be mean, but it's also because of the fact that if you are willing to pay more attention to the rules and the guidelines, then it is more likely in their eyes that you will pay attention to how well you write, period. You will have more attention to detail, and that attention to detail tends to lead to a more quality writing contest entry. So even if that is not necessarily the case, I would say make sure to follow the rules and the guidelines and the formatting. Because even though it may seem silly and stupid, it will give you that extra professional look and that extra professional edge and will make people take you more seriously. Instead of just going, oh, this is just a teenager trying to get published, they'll go, this is a teenager who knows what they're doing. And they will be impressed rather than just me. Which is sad. I don't want that to happen to you guys. You guys have a lot of potential and promise and talent, and it's important that they see that. But if you don't follow the rules and the guidelines for contests and for publication, they won't see that, which makes me sad. um, do you guys have any questions regarding formatting, um, rules and guidelines, publication, or contests? No. Oh, one more thing that I did want to mention. Um, Words that are emphasized should be in italics. However, thoughts are also in italics. So be careful not to emphasize a whole sentence, because then it just looks like thoughts. Also, thoughts are not in dialogue quotation marks. Every once in a while, you'll see an older novel that will do that, but again, that is an old style of writing. Formatting for thoughts is italics now. That is the universal way that it works. If your thoughts are not in italics, it will be confusing. Um, as far as publication and contest goes, I actually have a website that I have put together and I have built up that has a bunch of contests and has a bunch of publications for adults, but also for teenagers. One of the pages has contests and public and magazine publications that are just for teenagers, no other age group. It should be fantastic. I looked at them all, they all looked very high quality. Please look into submitting into those contests and publications. If you are going to look into those, please let me know if you have any questions or if the links don't work or anything like that. I'd be more than happy to help you. I would also be more than happy to help you try and get published in those places. I think that it's incredibly important to try and practice your craft, whether it's through contests or through short story publication. So if that is something you are interested in, please let me know. And if you're noticing anything funky on their rules and their guidelines page, feel free to ask me about it and see like what do they mean by no swords and talking animals in my story, and is this a rule or a guideline? And I'll be like, well, hey, it's a guideline, but at the same time, it's one of those things where it's a personal preference. So maybe don't have a talking sword or talking animal in your short story if you're going to publish to them. That was actually a guideline I ran across at one point. Apparently, they just don't like talking objects and animals. I don't know. I think they're fun, but to each their own preference. Um, Sometimes that can also be too because they haven't seen it done uniquely. So that doesn't mean you can't publish it there, but just know that you're more likely to get rejected because of the fact that they have seen it done badly so many times that the second they see it, they're immediately like, not this again, even if it's fantastic. Like, for example, with the scary story contest, there was actually one of the entries that was really, really good. But it started with, I'll give you $50 if you, and I can't remember what the rest of the sentence was. But the reason I can't remember is because there were 15 different entries that started with that exact same first line. And so even though one of those entries was phenomenally well done, because there were 14 others that were terribly done, by the time I reached that one, I was like, oh no, even though they did a good job with it. So keep in mind that if they have any guidelines like that, like saying, hey, don't do this, or hey, don't follow this specific trend, probably not a good match for you. Try to find another magazine or publication that might be a better match for you. Um, Last thing I wanted to mention is contest themes. Contest themes generally are very vague for a reason. This means that you have a lot of creative freedom, but it also means if you go too far off the mark, that they may or may not publish you purely because of that. So keep in mind if you don't get published in a themed anthology or a contest that is themed, know that it may be because you were too far off the mark. They generally, when it comes to themes, they want it to be close to the mark. They don't want it to be like so unique that you're going, okay, how does this connect to the theme? Um, a great example of this was one year I tried to get published in a short story anthology as a teenager, and I'll be honest, I can't even remember what the theme was. I think it was choose your own story, which is why I was like, excellent, I'll just write whatever I want. That's not really what they wanted. What they wanted was more of a someone choosing to go on an adventure, someone choosing to move forward. My friends who did get published in that anthology did stories that were very much like that, where they chose to go on an adventure. Oh. So just keep in mind when entering contests and things like that with a theme, if you go too far off the theme, that could potentially cause you problems. All right. If no one has any questions, I'm going to turn off the video and we can just write and enjoy. As far as the contests go here, the next one is due on the 21st of December, and remember, it's Cozy Christmas Mystery. Keep in mind that it can be any kind of subgenre so long as cozy mystery is the main genre. keep it nice, keep it light, keep it fluffy, keep it clean. But if you want it to be a murder mystery, you can have it be a murder mystery. If you want it to be a police procedural, you can have it be a police procedural. Whatever you'd like, so long as it fits with the main genre of cozy. It also is supposed to take place during Christmas time, but that's pretty vague. You can do Christmas Day, you can do the day before Christmas, you can do like December in general, like as long as it's Christmas time. All right, I'm going to turn the video off for today.